Hi, and welcome to Indigenous Podcast, episode 3. It is your host here, Marcus and Juan, and our very special guest, Alex from Texas. Alex, thank you for joining us today, man.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Juan. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Of course. Alejandro, to get this thing kicked off, this identity podcast, we'd like for you to introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about Identify Native, the page that you're a member of, and how it came to be.
My name is Alex. I'm originally from El Paso, Texas. From my dad's side, I'm a Coahuilteca, Native American. From my mom's side, I like to call it Anahuaca, or from one of the Mesoamerican nations, since that side of my family comes from central Mexico. But it was back in 2012 when the page Brown Continent was started by a northern native up in Virginia from the Occaneechi people. And he had gotten his drive years earlier by Chief Billy, I forgot his name, from the Piscataway Nation up in like the Maryland area, I think, where I guess they were talking about during the longest walk, I think, where all the natives walk from one side of from the Pacific Ocean all the way to the Atlantic out to Washington, D.C., was passing through there. It might have been when they met, but he got like his orders or his inspiration when Chief Billy told him that you need to, because there was a lot of people, like so-called Mexicans and Chicanos and Mexican Americans and Central Americans there. And he told him, you need to let these people know who they are, because he had already known them. There's a quote back in 1992 from Chief Billy from the Piscataway Nation, where he said all these so-called Hispanics are really Native American. And he felt that it was part of a prophecy or a vision that he had, that they were going to move up north and help, reclaim the land or repopulate the land. And so the founder of Brown Continent, based on that motivation and that message, it was probably, I think, about we're in 2021 now. It was probably back in like late 2016, 2017, where he started Identify Native 2020 census. And it was from there that I was mainly helping, along with a larger group of mostly in the majority of those people that were really active are all Southern natives, living here in the North. And those editors were people who didn't know who they were, but through interacting with us, either through private inbox or comments on the several pages where we kept repeating the same message, not Hispanic, not Latino, you're Native American. They got on board with it. They knew that there was a truth to it. It made sense to them, but it was a matter of time before they wrapped their heads around it and embraced it. And ever since then, we've been trying to lead that an identity movement, or people come to realize who they really are.
Thank you.
Our people, that is.
Excellent. And I was going to add on to that really quick. And like every movement, we're always going to get pushback. So for me, when I brought these things up, I guess, in certain groups on Facebook, the pushback would be that, we are half Native and half, either if we're from South or Central America, it'd be Spanish. How can you identify as full, Native, yada, yada, yada. So how was your response to critics like that? And I'm sure maybe you have encountered some, probably through social media or in person, because I've gone through some critics as well. So, I try my best to, change their mind.
Okay, talking about so-called full blood or mixed or half blood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I find it interesting that we're the ones that jump faster than anybody to call each other out and say how, you're mixed, you're not Native American, and we're the ones that are hurting each other in the long run. I've seen it on social media posts in Mexico and here in the North. It's like we've been rewired to attack one another. There is really nothing, no such thing as like pure blood, half blood, mixed blood. Yes, there is mixture. That doesn't mean that you're any less native than you are. I mean, we see a lot of white passing natives that are still part of their nations and their tribes, and they have full recognition by their community. A lot of us don't have that privilege or that honor or that capacity to be identified by any such community. So that's why the native to native recognition system was created, where I could look at you, Marcus, and say, you're Native American without a doubt. And you could look at me and say the same thing. And then we post family pictures of our ancestors. Oh, without a doubt, we know that you are Native American, So that came from when the Spaniards invaded. They created a caste system with about almost 20 designations, if I'm not mistaken. The mestizo, the castizo, then you have the cholo, and I think Juan wrote a really good article on that, but in South America, the caste system there. And the lowest of the caste system designation was mulatto. That's where you get mula from, mule. Well, what is a mule? The mule is a cross between a donkey and a horse. And after that, you can't breed mules anymore. So we're looking at their own designated pedigree system that they created. And just because that we either intermarried or were forced to or subjected to the rape of the Europeans here that invaded, they automatically deemed the offspring as mestizos. And it was from there where that began. We didn't create that. The Spaniards created that. So then they began separating the different types of offspring that would happen from there on out, between their people and our people, between Black and our people, their people and Black people that they brought from, that they originally brought as slaves. And that's where you have that whole caste system. But the fact that the Europeans created that, and the sad truth is that we give that so much credence when it was used to divide us. And now we use that system of dividing ourselves. So we attack one another and we're trying to call each other out and saying, no, you cannot be Native. You're this or that. We're not, without realizing all that has been ingrained in us over the past 4 to 5 centuries.
I always say, and I think I've said this before, our biggest opponent really is ourselves. And I think that's the key to, unlocking more of this identity amongst, more Native people, being able to persuade others, changing their mind. Another thing I wanted to point out is that it's really amazing that, these governments, especially, in South and Central America, still push this caste system, that the mestizo, that was used and created by the Spaniards. And you have governments all over, Central and South America still using that, pushing that media. And it's really crazy.
Well, who controls those governments? Who are those governments? Those are the majority of those people are the criollos, the descendants of the original Spaniards. And it suits them to misidentify us and make us believe it. It's a criollo legacy. Why? So that they can remain in power. Because once we start realizing, oh, we're not Misty, so we're actually Native American. Wait a minute. Oh, well, that means that I've been here forever. That means that these other people, these criollos, these Spaniards, these Anglos, Protestants, whatever, they're Europeans. They're not from here. And then they realize, oh, wait, they've only been here 400 to 500 years. That means that this is my land and they took it. You know what? I want my land. There's going to be a process that comes into play, and they work very hard to make sure that that they find ways to keep manipulating us. Every time we make a move forward, they're always going to try and cut you off at the pass and say, no, you can't. But the thing is, there is no single law anywhere, even in their laws. We're talking about European laws. There is no law that can tell you how you must identify yourself. That is your business. That's your ability to do that.
Yeah, exactly. That's when someone was telling me that, and I was like, excuse me. I was like, who died and made you God?
Right.
And
And when you said that we're each other's worst enemy, but let's take that even deeper. You can be your own worst enemy. I can be my own worst enemy. A lot of us still have to come to terms with that, and there's going to be a mental struggle and a grievance. What is it called? The grievance process that we have to go through, that a lot of us went through, coming to terms with this and realizing who we are. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Juan.
Oh, no, it's all good. Excellent points there. I was going to say, in terms of the identity thing, a lot of people will bring up the census and they'll be like, well, in the census definition, it mentions a tribe. And it's like, that's not true. If you read the entire definition, it says yes, it's for people with tribal affiliations, but it's also people that indicate their race as American Indian. So even if you have no tribe, you can still mark that down as your identity. And I think that people don't read the fine print. They just read the first part of the sentence. And it's like, read the whole thing. It's there. And even if it didn't say that, no other racial group requires a tribe. Black people aren't required to list an African tribe to be Black. So why would you require that from our race? It's complete nonsense.
Right.
So yeah, I just want to make that point.
White people aren't made to jump through those hoops, either. What are they going to be French? Or they, they're all lumped as white. And a lot of us, when we mark Hispanic or Latino, you're going to be counted as white, because that bolsters up the numbers on paper and it keeps ours reduced, Native American numbers reduced.
Oh, yeah.
And yes, and it's a very good point. Yeah, we don't go beyond that. And you notice how they set it all up? Native American's going to be at the very bottom. They got Hispanic, Latino way at the top. They got it all set up, to where they don't want you to pick that. You're going to jump for the first thing that they got you going for.
Yeah, exactly. And the last census, I'm curious to see what the census results will be for 2020. But I know for the last one, there was about over 50 million, Hispanics. But I believe like 18 million said that they were some other race. So that right there signifies that there's a mass confusion with our people they don't even know who they are. And then 26 million said that they were white, and only 600,000 said that they were American Indian. And it's like, you round up a random 10, Hispanics. They're not white people. Like, let's not play games. They're not white people.
Exactly. Yeah, just by looking at them.
Yeah.
Just to double check, I think I did count in 2017 or 2016. It's about almost 60 million. So maybe 10 million. Did you say 50 million?
Yeah, I thought I saw 50 something million for 2010, but I don't remember.
Oh, 2010. Okay, I was looking at a different date. I had read further, like in 2015 or something. It was like almost 60 million. Anyway.
Oh, yeah. It's growing, I'm sure, at this point.
Yeah, I'm sure. Adding on to that, in Peru, I'm 90% sure that if I wasn't adopted and I would have survived the sicknesses and diseases that I had, I would have also been thrown in this mestizo category by the government or by whatever agency I was in. So it's really amazing how these government officials like to box us in groups that really don't really represent our true Native identity. And to me, it almost seems like elimination, reducing Native American groups more and more until there are no more.
Yeah, statistical annihilation, and in South America, it's just as strong over there. In one of the articles that we put together, I have here a quote by Ecuadorian General Guillermo Rodriguez Lara, who said, "There is no more Indian problem. We all become white when we accept the goals of the national culture." And that runs true all over, from Mexico all the way down. You're considered a mestizo, regardless of what you look like. If you're no longer living with your native community, your people, if you no longer speak your language, if you're not participating with the community and the customs and living with your people, everything, any one of those will count you as mestizo or non-indigenous. And they do this on purpose. Again, it's all about keeping the numbers low to where they maintain their seat of power or dominance, you know. It's really interesting how this information pops up, but it's an intentional warfare, a warfare of statistical annihilation, you know, to where they can get us to believe that we're nobody, that we're nothing, we're insignificant. You know, you're no longer who your ancestors are. Don't even think about it.
Yeah, it's awfully convenient for their end goals. I remember there was somebody I was debating with on Facebook that he cited like statistics from the Mexican government about mestizos and I'm like, dude, like the very problem is even using the statistics from the Mexican government because it's dishonest. It's like if you're using that statistics, you've already lost this argument because it's operating off faulty logic, off fabrication from the beginning.
You're quoting criollos who hate us, who don't want us to be, you know, who want us to disappear, you know. And yeah, the whole fallacy behind the Mexican Revolution especially. And as a matter of fact, a lot of the revolutions in South America all occurred around the same time. This was in the early 1800s. If you think about it, you know, a lot of people argue that Mexico is an indigenous nation because of the name. And I said, no, an indigenous name was used by criollos, by the Spaniards, when they fought their mom and dad to take what they had, because they saw all the resources, all the mineral wealth that was leaving this continent for Spain. When they said, we can have that for ourselves, we should take control of that, and then we sell it to them. That's basically what happened. And we wrote a post about this. I translated it from some guy in Bolivia, I think, when he was talking about Simón Bolívar and how they all came together to foment these fake revolutions so that they can take power. So we have our people, you know, really mixed up. They see the Spanish language as a positive identifier. They see the name Mexico, which is stolen native land. You know, it's created by Europeans. They use an indigenous name to mark their stolen territory, our native land, you know. And then where are we at now? You know, we're still, you know, our people are still being abused. There was no revolution for our freedom, and we were used for both sides. And we willingly participated on both sides. Some of us with full knowledge, some of us without. That's what happened up in the North with the so-called War for American Independence. Natives were used on both sides.
That's a very good point. It makes me even think more like how much these independence movements in South and Central America were not really for freedom of native people. As you said, it was for, you know, the Spaniards, the sons and daughters of Spaniards that live in, you know, in the Americas to thrive more and to just, you know, replace the Spaniards, the Spanish Empire, with what we see today. You know, look at government, and just all sorts of higher administrations. So I think we stayed on question the first one. So move on. You know, Juan and I have had, you know, different instances of, you know, racist incidents in our past. Me for more so when I was younger, and Juan, you know, as you said, high school. So my question was, you know, if you wouldn't mind maybe sharing like one or two experiences of what you dealt with, like if in racism, you know, growing up as an individual. And if I'm not correct, you lived in Texas for most of your life?
Yes, I lived in Texas, West Texas, and then now Central Texas. And racism, yes, in various forms. Maybe before I began to remember who I was as a Native American, as an indigenous person of this continent, I probably didn't catch it too much, you know. But then when I look back, you know, because, you know, when you're asleep to that, because you think that you're part of the great, like the larger scheme of the picture, even your so-called white friends, you know, when you look back, you know, they were really treating you bad because of who you were or your background or your race, you know. But some specific instances, a so-called friend from the past, we ran into each other on Facebook. and we connected. This was back in like 2010, and he saw what I was posting, information about, Native American, this and that. He's, "Are you calling yourself Native American?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm Native American." He says, "No, you're not. I've known you almost all your life. You're Catholic." And I was like, "Catholic is not even a race." He said, "You're not Native American. And if you're going around claiming that, you're actually doing a disservice to real Native Americans who are living on reservations and this and that." And I was like, and I broke it down to him really quick. I just said, "Look, you don't have to live on a reservation to be Native American. Even a lot of Northern Natives were urbanized and they left the reservations. That does not make them non-Native American. It doesn't make them any less Native. Their race is still Native American. A lot of us were assimilated in various ways. Some willingly assimilated. Others, like me, I didn't know what I was doing, but I know I'm Native American. And he's like, "Man, I don't know what you're smoking, man, but you need to get off of that." And I said, "You know what? That's it. Blocked out of my life." It's like, "Oh, and I'm sorry." He did say, he's like, "I probably have more Native blood than you." And I'm talking about a red-haired, freckled-faced, blue-eyed, white man. And I was like, "Yeah, where on your left big toe?" And let me guess. It was a Cherokee grandmother, right? And he never responded after that.
Oh, they all love to freaking. It's like the same Cherokee woman like open her legs to 1,000 men or something. I have no idea. Like they all have a Cherokee great grandmother. I don't even know.
And if anything, that is a disservice to Cherokee women to go around claiming that somehow a Cherokee woman wanted to marry a white man, and let's make a story about it and create another myth like they did with Pocahontas. Let's create another story, and and anything that will give them some sort of credence to latch on to justify their presence here. I think, so yes, it is demeaning and it's very insulting. I'm sure, you can only imagine how the Cherokee people feel about having to hear that and having to actually confront white people who tell them that.
Right. And if they truly did have a Cherokee great grandmother, like by the way a lot of these people act, they don't even have a percentage of Native blood. But anyways, they would be a disgrace to this ancestor anyway, so they shouldn't even claim this ancestor. But anyway, Marcus, I see you were going to say something.
Oh, sure. I was going to say, I can't put that much blame on them because I believe that we are whitewashed in society from elementary school to believe that someone from South and Central America cannot be Native. I think that's taught by us at a very young age. And I'm not saying all, but a lot of teachers, particularly, where I grew up in, don't not preach, but, talk about this issue that, most people are Native. Again, the school system that I grew up in was 97% white. There's not much of a need to talk about that so much. But again, it creates this confusion amongst people who aren't Native to believe that if I said, "Hey, I'm Native," that person from that school district will be like, "No, you're not. You're from Peru." Like, So I do believe that there's a major issue in, the education system, and at least in the U.S., to make it feel like if I look at someone, and I've made this comparison before, someone from Canada, from First Nations, and I look at a man named, Jose, that's taking care of the fields in California, they're both entirely different people, but they aren't, they're both the same.
We do that a lot. I love pairing up doubles for memes, for identify Native, where I could find someone from from Canada, from the Haudenosaunee, the League of Five Nations, or the Confederacy of Five Nations up there. It's not, the misnomer is Mohawk, but Kenyan Quehaga, and I found her double in Peru. And I put a meme together with those two women. They almost look alike, and I was like, from north to south, we're the same people. And I love just pairing all these faces, where we even got people sending us their pictures. Find my double, you know, like, all right, we'll try, you know. And wherever I go, if I get into conversations about natives, I have all these photos saved. And like a lot of my friends from Mexico that I work with on and off in construction, I got my phone. I was like, okay, where do you think this person is from? They're like, from Mexico. It's like, okay. And this person, Mexico too. I mean, I don't know. And like, I flip through them and they're like, that's their world, Mexico. So I can show them any native man or woman and they'll say they're from Mexico. I mean, that's all I can say, you know. And they're like, okay, no, Bolivia, Nicaragua, Alaska, Canada, United States, this and that. And they're like, what?
And what also doesn't help that is the government, you know, also ensuring that teachers practice this. Well, Mexico can't be a mostly native country. You've got Hispanics mestizo. And that's what they'll teach. A lot of them will teach children because the word Hispanic is so ingrained in the American society. So,
hey, I have something to throw in with this. Actually, this is perfect timing. Perfect timing. All right, this is a quote from a Spaniard that I saw on Facebook on this argument. This is what he says. As a Spaniard, I will tell you this. None of us, not a single one, look at Latinos in Latin America and see you the same as us because you aren't. The only thing in common is the language, and your version of Spanish is butchered in comparison to actual Castilian. We don't have the same music, the same culture, or even the same genetics. Culturally, Latinos and Spaniards have nothing in common, from a Spaniard himself on Facebook.
I want to add to that too. And I told you about this one. In Mexico City, I stayed with one of my good friends who used to live up here. He went back to Mexico. And he's a tattoo artist now. He's married and has kids. And we're hanging out. And everywhere we walk throughout Mexico City, it's one of the largest reservations on the face of the earth. You know, you'll never be surrounded by so many Native Americans if you walk one day through Mexico City. And we were talking about how beautiful our people are. I was like, man, look at all, like, I wonder if they know who they are. He said, you know what? I had this one guy from Spain who moved out here recently. And we were talking about that exactly, where he said, you know what? I've only been here like 6 months, 8 months. And I can't believe all these people here that claim to be mestizo. He's like, he said, I don't understand why they call themselves mestizo. When I walk around and I look everywhere, I see Indians. Yo veo puros indios. That's all I see. I was like, man, I guess my ancestors really did some damage here because these people they do not look anything like Spanish or mestizo. He said, they don't look Hispanic. That's for sure. And I asked my friend, I was like, get me in touch with this guy. I want to get this on videotape because sadly, we need a white face to be saying those things because our people who have been so brainwashed will believe it more. They'll give it much more credence than when it comes from us. If we tell them you're Native American, it's like, get out of here. You're a mestizo like me. You're nothing.
And the history books say that 90% of us got wiped out. No. So you're telling
I don't think so.
That the Texicans who assisted the Spaniards in 1520, 1519 to wipe out the Aztec Empire, all decided, all hundreds and thousands of them, once they beat the Aztec Empire, they all decided to just drop dead.
Yeah, no,
right.
I don't know where they get these statistics. Like they pull it out in somebody's asshole because it's like
they make them
you
up.
weren't there. Yeah, you weren't there to count all these people. Who the hell was counting all these people?
Did the Spaniard go around the entire continent of Mexico to count every dead body, or like to make sure that we're all dead? It's like, yep, 90% of people died. No.
I think look at how many of us there are. You know, and me living up here in the north in the United States. Since my childhood, I've been seeing the entire Southwest region becoming more and more brown. Yes, with the influx of Southern relatives migrating and moving in here, up here, but also with our people who are reproducing. It's like, I really don't think when you see that large amount of brown people, I think it's a lie that they exterminated 90% of our people. But I will say that such a small amount of Europeans that came compared to our population that were able to trick us and subdue us into the position we're in now, you know. And various things happened where either we won or lost, but they kept coming and coming and coming. But, you know, that we are 67% of the entire population of the Western Hemisphere. The founder of Brown Continent, he's of all things, he worked in business, and he's a statistician, and he crunched all the numbers, looking at putting all the mestizo populations together, all the indigenous populations together, and, you know, giving like a mean average. He said, like, man, we make 67% of the entire population of the Western Hemisphere. This is still a brown continent.
Yeah, I had a friend that he looked into that, and he was questioning it, and he was saying, well, it seems like they just counted literally every, you know, Hispanic or Latino as indigenous. And I was like, I don't think they did that. But he said that he ran the numbers, and he's like, oh, well, I think it's closer to half and half. And I was like, okay, well, how do you run the numbers? Because like Mexico, again, they don't count indigenous unless you speak the language, you live in the community. You have to have ridiculous standards from these, you know, according to these countries to be indigenous. And he's like, well, I would combine the mestizo and indigenous. He's like, but the countries that were mostly like mestizo, like, you know, like for example, I think Ecuador, he's like, I just split it half and half. And I'm like, there's your first freaking mistake. Half and half. It's like
ridiculous.
No mestizo. There's not like half white people in Ecuador and half brown people. And
Nope.
it's not like the population's like all half white and then one's all half brown. No, like everyone that's mestizo, even if you're just like, let's say you're a little more white than you are indigenous. Let's say you're 40% indigenous, 50% white. You're going to look indigenous. You're going to look brown. That's an indigenous person. So it's like your methodology right there. That's the problem right there. Like you didn't calculate it well at all. Like if you're basing it off like splitting in half to be fair, you're not being fair even from the beginning. So those calculations.
And I know, and the problem there is, it's that mentality, the self-defeating behavior. If we're going to rely on so-called official statistics, they're always going to have our numbers reduced to a 1%. Almost every country on the so-called country on the Western Hemisphere boasts a 1% indigenous population. And again, they do this, they get away with this on paper because they set the criteria, they created the system, and they impose this. You cannot be indigenous if you don't live with your community, if you're not speaking any of your languages, if you're not participating in the customs. Basically, if you're not part of your community, you're not speaking your language, and you left, you're automatically considered mestizo or non-indigenous. They do this, I mean, and that quote from Guillermo Lara, he says, when we embrace we all become white when we embrace the dominant culture. So that's how they bolster their numbers. And the problem is that we believe that. We believe that, yes, we can be cultural mestizos, but racially, nobody can call the shots. Race can be elusive, but if we use the simple criteria that was created in the 1800s by Blumenbach, if you aren't Black, if you aren't Asian, if you aren't white, then you're Native American. And yeah. I mean, we have to use that because sadly, that's what the majority of our people see. That's what they think. Latino and Hispanic are not, those aren't races. Those are cultures that are part of the Caucasian race from Europe. It means European.
Yeah, no, exactly. So to move on, because to this other question, because I was curious, with this identity movement, in your opinion, is this identity movement, this identify Native thing that we're doing, is this its own movement, or would you say that it is Chicanoism continued, or is it Chicanoism, or is it its own thing? What do you think?
No, it's its own thing, and we've gotten into it with a lot of people who identify as Chicanos. Why it would be better to identify as Native American. And a lot of these people are very adamant. No, I was like, Chicano's not a race. What is your race? And they'll be like, no, I'm Chicano or I'm Chicana. And it's like, no, but what is your race? That's not a race. So let's picture a map of the Western Hemisphere. Okay. And there's a meme that we were working on, and we have so many ideas that are, yet to be used, but we have a partial meme where we're working on a map of the Western Hemisphere, and we have the Southwest US colored in its own color or circled off. And then from there is somebody saying, I'm Chicano. And then somebody else says, no, but I'm Mexican. And then we have the country of Mexico circled off, and somebody there, I'm Mexican. And then you have somebody within central Mexico, I'm Mexica or I'm Aztec. And it's this tiny little dot in central Mexico. And then you have the large bracket or the circle around the entire Western Hemisphere. I'm Native American. So when you call yourself Chicano, you're saying that, you're automatically identifying the European imposed borders, and then when you say you're Mexican, you're doing the same thing. When you say you're Chicano, you're geographically relegating yourself to a tiny portion of the Western Hemisphere, therefore disassociating yourself from the larger family of the entire Western Hemisphere, from Patagonia to Alaska. So that's why we tell them it's very important. When you say you're Native American, you're from this entire hemisphere, from the one continent, the United Landmass. When you say you're Chicano, you're saying that you're of Mexican extraction, a Criollo creation, born in the United States, another European creation. So you're giving credence to large pieces of stolen land and a border to include, and you're negating your race, who you are. In other words, you're just running in circles, trying to give credence to a political identity that was created for very specific purposes in a very specific time. Maybe it served its purpose. Now let's jump onto the racial category. And a lot of Chicanos and Chicanas did embrace their native side or realize that they are, in fact, Native American. But in a lot of the symbolism, you did see a lot of that. You had a Spaniard head looking at an Indian head, and they were calling themselves Chicanos, that were the mix of the two, not fully Indian, not fully Spanish. And then you had Vasconcelos in the 1920s adding his whole cosmic race propaganda. The mixture of native with European blood created this fake cosmic race, which, again, a lot of our people have embraced and misinterpreted, not knowing that a European created that. So now we have the cosmic race, mestizo, and all these illusions that were created by Europeans to confuse us. But no, it's its own thing. It's a movement, and it can be anybody's movement who come to realize that they're Native American. We don't have a patent on it, or we don't copyright it. We just say, if you agree with the fact that you're Native American, keep pushing it. Tell your family, your loved ones, your friends, your relatives. Tell them, hey, guess what? We're Native American. Break it down for them. Make it your movement.
Absolutely. And I think, none of us are owners of this movement, but I think the title is just simply the Identify Native movement is probably the simplest and best title for something like this. It goes right to the point.
Yeah. You know what? And if it makes sense, it's probably because it's true. You know what I mean? Yeah. We're not trying to confuse people. That's not the way we work. We were confused for 500 years intentionally. And we're just shaking our people and like, hey, wake up. And on the 67% number of the population, the founder of Brown Content made sense, since he's a statistician. He says you take a small part and it represents the greater whole. You don't have to go walking from Alaska to Patagonia and count every single head all over. He's like, that's the beauty of statistics. You can get groupings from different areas, and from there you draw your larger conclusion, he said. He's all, that's going to tell you pretty much. It's like your litmus test to tell you what's going on in various regions, So that's where we say we are the giant awakening. We're like we're an 800-pound gorilla in a cage with a little baby that's hitting us. a sleeping gorilla. So it's only a matter of time.
To add on to that, would a lot of people still want to embrace, Latino. How would you consider that destructive to movement such for Native Americans to identify as wanting to identify as Native? I was just curious on your take on that.
Right, because one thing we've run into is some people that say, well, we should keep the Latino term because we want to be inclusive to other races in all these other countries. And this is what my response is. Why is there a need to be inclusive? This is our own thing. This is our identified Native movement. Why should we be inclusive to any other race? And then number two, if you have a Black person in Mexico or a Black person in Peru, you don't have to call them anything. Just call them a Black person in Peru, like a Black or Peruvian. That's what they are, a Mexican. They don't change their nationality. You don't have to invent a fancy new term, and especially not some Eurocentric one. But what's your take on this, Alex?
Yeah, those responses that you've come across, we get them a lot. What about this is not inclusive to Black Latinos and blah, blah, blah. I was like, you know what? Latino means European. Tell those Black people to call themselves Black or African or find their nation or tribe affiliation from their motherland. We have to see like how confused we are that we're trying to make a case for European terms. We're trying to fight for in favor of inclusiveness based on the concept or the perception that Europeans had created for us. We don't want to stand back. Nobody wants to touch Native American. That's taboo. And a lot of people do at the same time. So we had Italian people comment on Identify Native saying, stop using the word Latino, telling our readers, he's like, Latino or Latin means the Latin people of Rome. It means ancient Rome, and those are our ancestors. That's who we are. The modern contemporary Italian people are the descendants of the original Latin people who spoke Latin and had a culture based on that, the Roman Empire or Romans, So we made a meme out of that. We just got to circulate it because, again, when you see Italian people, we got to put our faces to it and like, why are you stealing our culture is basically what some of them were saying too. This one lady, I think her name is Grace Cibelli, something like that. She was going all over the place commenting, I'm Latina. I'm from Italy. That's my culture. You all need to stop using the Latino. You're not Latino. She's like telling me you're brown. You're not Latinos. But it's not inclusive. It relegates us to a European identity. Why not make a racial inclusivity with Native American? Everybody wants to unify on Spanish and Spanish names and surnames, or Hispanic names and surnames. Everybody wants to identify on this whole Latino thing that was created by Frenchmen. And I brought my paper here on this article that we wrote, Who Made Latin America Latin? And this one writer says the idea, which I repeat is an idea, goes back to the 1830s, particularly the writings of a Frenchman, Michel Chevalier, a follower of Saint Simon, a utopian socialist. Chevalier argued that this part of the Americas was populated those of a, quote, Latin race. And you have to think about that. I guess the native element or the native people were considered irrelevant or too primitive, to count. So he says, and that therefore Latin America could join with Latin Europe in the struggle against Teutonic Europe, Slavic Europe, and Anglo-Saxon Europe. So they were trying to maintain this hold on the Western Hemisphere on their portion by designating it as Latin America, has no relationship to the Anglo-Saxons, the Spaniards, or maybe they are involved with the Spaniards since it's a Latin language, since Spanish is, but they wanted to distance themselves and keep that claim. So they're the ones, these two Frenchmen, they labeled it, that portion, anything from like Mexico down south, as Latin America. And that's where it comes from. We are not Latin. And I've gotten into it with people, hey man, Latin America is very real. I was like, yeah, it's some real BS. I mean, this is still our homeland, not Latin America. The Latins came here. So you have these so-called Black Latinos, you have Latinos, whatever that is, and then you have white Latinos. The only real Latinos are the white Latinos. Those are the only real Latinos or Latin people. We have no relationship to Latin America, to Latin anything, unless you actually have an Italian mom or an Italian dad, basically, that just came straight from Italy. I don't know. It's like, we are not Latin. It has nothing to do with us and our roots. And that's the thing, is like, because we don't know who we are. Just because and we've been sold on this too. We're now a marketable commodity. So now you have so-called Latino television shows, and we think that that's our people there. So we think that we're empowered and we have a voice. We have Latino products. We have, it just, they change it from English to Spanish. And now we think that that we have a say now, or we have like a niche now, because we think we're Latin and we're being marketed to, and we have specialty stores that are in products. I mean, Coca-Cola has commercials in Spanish, and they used to use the word Latino. I mean, all these commercials use Latino, Latina. Latinos like to do this, Latinos like to do that, and they're using now it's a way to market to us. We've been made consumers also now.
Right. Excellent points, and you hit everything on the head there. I'm glad you had an excellent response. So we're moving now to, I would say, an overall discussion of the labels, like mestizo, Hispanic, which we've already touched on. But I wanted to ask, how will changing the labels change, let's say, the power dynamic of our people? I know for me, the first thing I think of, again, because I was here illegally for a very long time, is I was made to feel like I was some foreigner and like I was inferior and all that. So I know it would change the immigration debate drastically in terms of giving a lot of us the moral high ground, because it's like, okay, you change the term from being, oh, those illegals, those stupid Hispanics are crossing the border illegally and stealing our shit. And now you change it to Native Americans are crossing the border. And that basically diffuses that really hateful statement. It diffuses it because it makes no logical sense to say that.
Well, that's exactly why they call us illegal. So you came here, but you were made to feel illegal. Think about that. Your family moved up north, but the way things are, the way the system is set up, and with the mentality of people believing that, well, they made you think that you're an illegal alien. But we have to realize that mainstream media will never say Native Americans crossing the southern border. They're going to call our people illegal immigrants. They're going to call them migrants, migrant caravans. They're not going to call all those people walking up from Central America Native American caravans. They'll be shooting themselves in the foot. They need to make us all believe that anybody living on the other side of one of their apartheid borders is now an illegal alien. They need to make us think. They need to make everybody think that that we can be considered trespassers, foreigners, outsiders, illegal immigrants, criminals, assassins. Anything but Native American. When do you think we'll ever? And we shouldn't wait for this. But a lot of people say we need to make them realize. No, we need to make ourselves realize that we're Native American. We're gonna expound our life essence. We're gonna waste it trying to convince them that they need to recognize us, when we are the ones that who need to recognize ourselves. Like, I had to come to terms with recognizing myself, and then we all do it with one another. We're like, man, I know it's obvious you're not Black. It's obvious you're not white or Asian. You're Native American. But they do this on purpose. Again, calling us, they're going to call us everything, because they will not give this up willingly. They're like, okay, you guys are Native Americans. Here are the keys to my house. Here's my land. This is actually originally such and such land. They're never going to give it back. And I will share this one elder from South Texas. He's a Coahuiltecan. He told me that this white professor from a university went up to him and asked him for information on the peyote ceremonies and if he could connect them with some of the tribes in Oklahoma. So the elder was telling me, I was vetting him. I was checking him out, like, just another white person who wants information for their thesis. And that's, that's what they want. So he said, I'm going to ask you a question. He's like, yeah, sure. He's like, what do white people tell their children to make them, to encourage them to be successful? And the guy was honest. He said, he thought about it for a while. He said, we don't tell them anything. We just hand it to them, because, we took everything. It's in our hands. So we just hand it over to them when it's time. We don't need to tell them anything. It's like, okay, I appreciate your honesty. I'm going to help you out, but, that's a very startling admission. And that's why, they need to keep us in the dark as to who we are.
Certainly. I had a little question that I was wondering. So what would you say would be the difference between somebody that's, like mixed, that says that they're Native, right? Because we're all pretty mixed. But where would you draw the line between somebody that's that and then somebody that's pretty much just a white Spaniard, like, or, pretty much just a white person, let's say, living in Mexico? Where would you draw that distinction? Like, do you have a percentage in mind? Do you have is it based off looks, like, oh, well, they pretty much look like a white person, so therefore they are a white person? What do you think on that?
Well, I mean, honestly, like, a lot of us are afraid to use observation. And again, there's more than meets the eye. But, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it must be a duck. We're not going to confuse ducks with eagles. We're not going to confuse buffalo with cows, But, again, we don't know. And what do they have? 1% of blood, like these white Spaniards that are running around in Mexico, claiming that they're Native American too. I mean, there's a lot of white passing, natives out there too. The thing is, though, is that they're not recognized like the way they are here in the United States, where they're still part of their communities, and we do have to draw the line towards saying, like, well, man, I mean, some of the people are so watered down and white, and I know a lot of people are not going to like this, but I get this from a lot of Northern natives. There's a lot of white people on the rolls pretending to be Native, or they're no longer, or they'll even say they're so diluted, they don't even practice. They don't even, they're not even a part of the ceremonies or anything. They're really not Native anymore, But even by looking at them, they'll even call it down the line, I've gotten comments like that before. It can be very confusing. And you can tell, after a while, you can tell if somebody's like really like living their Native way, if they are Native. And you can tell a lot of Native people who aren't living their Native way, I had these friends who are brother and sister in El Paso. And my friend, he was light skinned with green eyes, and he had light brown hair. And his sister was dark brown, jet black, coarse, straight hair, big wide nose. I mean, very, very Native features. I mean, without a doubt. But they're brother and sister, So, of course, some of these genetics are going to pop up at one point or another. From my observation, I'm not a scientist. I don't break anything down into these categories, but just by looking, I can't really be scientific about this. We have to draw a line. We're like, look, man, you're white. You're not Native. I mean, or at least what is your cultural affinity? Show it. I mean, it's going to be harder for white people or white passing natives to prove that they are Native American, you know?
Yeah.
But we can't police though. That's the thing. It's like, because they'll shoot us in the foot, you know? We got a lot of white passing natives or light skinned natives that are actually at the forefront of the identity movement. You know, the ones who are coming to terms and re-embracing who they are. And, you know, if they're helping us, they're fighting for us, there's no reason to, like, you know, draw a very, very black and white line. There's a lot of gray area, and anything is possible, you know. But if you're blue-eyed, orange hair, and freckles, man, we're gonna say no. Come on, next. Bring us your Cherokee grandmother. We're gonna ask her for some wisdom in this moment. Great grandmother, because I mean, I don't know where it is. I had this redneck hillbilly here in Texas who's an ex-rodeo rider cowboy. He saw my native hat. Again, more racism. White people are like, are you really Native American? No, I just pretend to be. You know, it's like, you know, that's the thing. It's like they don't know. And they're also on this mindset of they're trained. I was like, yeah, I'm Native American. He's like, oh, yeah, me too. This guy was like blistering pink and purple blotches on his white skin, gray eyes, big white beard and mustache and gray hair, white guy. And he's like, oh, I am too. I'm Blackfoot. He didn't say part Blackfoot. He said Blackfoot. And he's just Blackfoot. I'm like looking at him. I'm like, all right. Take off your shoes and let me see, man. Which one? You didn't say feet. You said foot.
Oh, yeah. And like the brainwashing is so extreme, because I remember back in high school, there's this white guy. He didn't look a percent, you know, Native. And he said that he was Native, and he used the middle name like Warhawk. I'm not going to say his full name, but he used the middle name Warhawk. And I'm like, what the hell? And he would be like, oh yeah, I'm Native American. And he'd be proud of this. And you wouldn't even be able to tell it, right? You know, it's the Cherokee great grandmother thing. But he would treat me like absolute crap, and other people that look like me like absolute crap. So it's like, so you're taking pride in something that you're not, and you're actually treating the real thing that you aspire to be, the real thing you're hijacking. You're treating the real thing like complete crap. That lets me know that you're full of shit. Like I see right through you.
Ignorance, lack of knowledge. We can't expect them to know. And that begs for the question, to what degree are we under any sort of obligation to educate them? You know, right now I'm saying no. You know, we need to convince ourselves who we are. We need to show ourselves and learn who we are. Basically, no, you know. And the concept of I need to find myself is foreign to this continent, because we come from a people who know who they are. So there's a matter of knowing who you are. You know, let the Europeans go run up and down like high mountains or whatever, scale canyon walls, because they're finding themselves. We don't have to do that because we know who we are. We never did crazy stuff like that, or we did it eons ago. We don't have to do it anymore.
So I ran into this recently. Okay. So apparently, which I'm kind of struggling with a little bit, maybe, and I would appreciate your perspective. Apparently in Mexico, and it seems like this is the case, not just in Mexico, but all these other Central and South American countries, that they view race differently. So this person from Mexico that grew up there told me, he said that they don't use the word race there. They don't think like that. He said that they talk about culture only. He says that to say that you're part Native or you're part this, you know, that makes you a laughing stock and all this other stuff. And so I asked him, I'm like, okay, well, if that's the case, you guys don't see race, then why is there discrimination between those that are still indigenous tribes or those that are just simply darker looking? Why is there words in Spanish like prieto, which means dark skin? Why is that an insult? Why is being called indio an insult? Why was the Yalitza Aparicio called all these negative things by people that look just like her, maybe a shade lighter? why was that a thing then? And he said, oh, well, no, that's colorism. Like, you know, it's just based off the color. He's like, based off the color. I'm like, you're just slapping another name to it. Like, you're not calling it racist. It's still the same thing. It's still race. It's still racial. So I just think that's really silly. What's your opinion here on that?
You caught him. Now you know that one particular person does not speak for millions of people. That was his own personal perception on it, his take on it. And the fact that he says, if you do that here, a lot of people will laugh at you. Again, if he's going to try to use methods of ridicule, or saying that there's going to be mass ridicule if you say that, he's just trying to shut you down and change your mind, or make you, or, you know, convince you to his own personal perception. We get a lot of people who say, you know, the generic saying that that, again, it probably came from white people, where they said race is a social construct. You know, it's like, okay, do you know what you're saying? And how is that a social construct? And what socialness or society created this construct? You know, it's like race was created, the idea or the theory of race, the designations of race was created by a European. It's a European constructed theory. It was created by Friedrich Blumenbach, Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, in the early 1800s, who was a so-called anthropologist. Again, that's a European thing. The study of all other cultures except theirs. And we didn't do that. Same thing with archaeology, and no insult to our people who are out there digging our people's remains. But we weren't archaeologists. But he created the 5 classes of race: the white race, the red race, the black race, the yellow race, and the brown race, which he related to the Malaysian people, or the Southeast Asians. Well, if you look at it, all people are brown except Europeans, you know, but it was his theory, which is in play now, which separated people into those racial categories. That's what we need to use. We need to use that as a tool or a method of getting to know knowing who we are again, remembering who we are. And I don't have a problem with using the racial designations, because that's what the majority of people think. People want to sidestep it and pretend it doesn't exist. They want to act like, no, there's no such thing as race, you know, especially when white people say that. Oh, you know what? I don't believe in race. So it's like, you know what? Your ancestors created the concept of race. So, bitch, you better see it now. You know, it's like, you better see it. Excuse my language, but it's like, you better get on board and start seeing it. Yes, now there is race, and we're feeling it because the color of our skin. Because of the color of our skin, there are people who don't have the color of our skin that are using their political, financial, and economic tools against us to keep us oppressed. Some of us make it in there and get on up, but the majority of us are not. And we will probably never get there. We won't be allowed. You know, it's a lot harder.
Right, exactly. And I hate it when they to me, it's a cop out whenever someone says, oh, well, race isn't a real thing. It's it's a social construct. You're saying that as if that makes it any less real. Let's come down to Coleman, Alabama. Let's take a black person and me, and let the sun set in Coleman, Alabama. Let's see if we wake up alive in the morning. Let's see how your social construct pans out.
Yeah, exactly. I've been in Georgia. I was in Georgia once back in and this was before I began to know before I knew I was Native American. Back then, going through the South, I was like, oh, I'm not an American. Now I feel like a Mexican. It's like, you know, walking to certain places and everybody turns around and they just keep looking at you, and, you know, and it's all white people, and you know that you're not white, or you begin to remember, you know, you're not white. You're not an American. Now you know that you're being looked at like a Mexican. You're brown. You're not white. You know, and you know, and the way they treat you too, the way they talk to you, the way they talk down. I've worked with white people, and the way they talk to me is definitely not the same as the way they talk to the other white people. You know, you know. And why is it that they're not talking to me, but to every single white person here on the job site, you know, they talk to them like buddy, buddy, you know, and they listen to them. But if they ask me something and I say something, they like cut you off, or, you know, but, you know, that's not all white people, you know, not all of them are like that. You know, there's a lot, you know, and as a matter of fact, one of our editors that used to be with us a couple of years ago, it was her mom. It was her mom who told her that she was Native American. Her mom was white, you know, so, you know, there's a lot of anomalies out there. We just can't, there's a lot of gray area. And like I said, anything is possible.
Yeah, for sure. Which I think that kind of leads into the next question. If you want to take that one, Marcus, this, I know this hits a little home to you. So if you want to, go into that.
Sure. So, you know, with this movement that, you know, trying to take place more and more with people identifying as Native, do you feel that, you know, at least I think here in the US, our society is currently going through this imperialistic movement, you know, to reject these, how would I say, these ways that really might not benefit, people of all, colors and creeds. So do you feel that, not just, white people, but Black people and, East Asians and whatnot could also be allies to this movement of people wanting to identify more as Native, and like within time, these non-Native people would agree with our points and understand? Or do you feel that maybe they might not be able
to? In what way do you envision them being allies?
Yeah, as allies.
Yeah. Oh, as allies. In other words, like supporting the movement.
Yeah, supporting the movement.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. On the Identify Native page, we've gotten comments every now and then from people in the Philippines, and I have a few friends on social media, like one is really close, and we chat a lot, and they share a lot of our posts on their pages or on like Malaysian or Filipino or Southeast Asian forums, and I tell them, they're in the same exact position. They went through the same exact thing that we did, especially anybody from Mexico all the way down to South America, who were hit by the Portuguese and the Spaniards. They were hit by the Spaniards, and they went through the same thing. Filipino, it's Spaniard, from Prince Philip or King Philip. I don't know who they named it after. And they realized that these are European designations. They're misnomers. They're misidentity tags. And they all have a lot of them have Hispanic names and surnames. And I told them, you all should start an identity movement over there. Get everybody. No, we can't, man. You can't understand the brainwashing. I was like, it's the same thing here, man. And tell them, come on, bro, get it going. They can be allies. There's a lot of Black people too look at the Black Power movement. Look at the Black people who are reclaiming their continent. Even though they're here, they realize where their roots come from and where they come from, and what about us? We're on our homeland, but we refuse to reclaim this continent as our homeland because we think that we're these insignificant nobodies, foreigners and trespassers of some like cosmic mixed race, that we no longer have the right to reclaim this continent as our homeland. We're not from anywhere else. We didn't come from anywhere else. So yes, we do have Black allies. We have people from India who commented, I support all you Native Americans reclaiming your homeland. We went through the same thing. One lady said, and I'm going to post all these comments. We took screenshots. We fought off the oppression in India and in South Africa. I come from people from South Africa and India. We're all, we all stand behind Native Americans who are re-identifying themselves, who are remembering who they are, so, and white people too. We have white people who stand behind it, Maybe they don't stand to lose much. Maybe they don't own land, You know, they're part of that tiny class of white people who are, you know, renting their life away. You know, they don't own anything, and they stand behind us too. Maybe they see that we're definitely not going to treat them the way their white elite treat them. You know, I don't know, but we do have allies, and we do believe in it. If they support us wholeheartedly and say, yes, you are Native American, yeah, well, then tell your family too. You know, we tell white people, why don't you tell your family whose continent this is? You know, make them realize. You know, make them realize whose land they're standing on, whose land they've been standing on in for how many generations. You know.
Right. And I wanted to throw this point in there because, again, we don't know who's viewing. But I'd invite people to read An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Dunbar Ortiz, because she goes into detail. There was a systematic genocide that happened here against Native peoples, especially in the continental U.S. You had Scott-Irish settlers that came here. It wasn't really the formal armies that wiped out a lot of natives. It was the settlers that did that. And they would go in bands and they would burn down villages and they would kill all the women, children, and the men and erase everything. And then inhabit that land. They kept pushing west and west and west because they were greedy and they wanted more and more. And that's always overlooked. So, you know, some people might just like look at us incredulously, like, oh, you're talking about like white people, they're standing on land that doesn't belong to them. Oh, it's a fact that they was won over the dead corpses of women and children, and that's the fact. You can't erase that.
Yeah, it was intentional. It was intentional. I mean, why do we see the same repeated situation all the way from Alaska down to the bottom tip of Chile? The same exact thing. It was to steal the land. Let's get rid of the people. Let's try and exterminate them, push them out of existence, because we want the land, we want the resources. And I've told some white people who complain about this system, I said, you know, you stand to profit and benefit off of this more than what we do, and what the large majority of brown and black people do, and Asians, you know. And but this is the irony of your system. Your ancestors were used here. They came poor, you know, some of them in shackles or whatever. And you came here poor, and you were used to wipe out our ancestors, to do all the dirty work, burn down communities, burn down entire, like, you know, large communities, fight them, kill off my ancestors up and down the East Coast, and start trudging inward towards the West. And once it was safe for the elite of your colonies, it's like a bee colony, you know. You have your elites and all this, but this is a vicious one, you know. You guys were like the worker bees doing all the dirty work, and then your elite come in, all your lawyers and bankers and politicians. Once it's safe to set up shop, now look where you're at. You're enslaved by them. You don't own the land that you think is yours. You have to pay taxes on it to your elite, or they'll come and take it. Quit paying your property taxes. You'll realize who really owns that land, you know, that you claim is yours. So I tell them that's the irony. It's like the lower class, supposedly the poor lower classes of the European societies, did all the dirty work. They were used, you know, and then the armies came in after that to put, you know, to lay in the death blow, and finally really like strike it hard to put our people, either exterminate them or put them on reservations. But yeah, the first settlers, the colonial settlers, were the first ones to start burning the countrysides and the forests. The loggers, the miners, the gold diggers, oil speculators, everything, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. But wanted to move to question 8. What is your view on So I'll give you an example. I'm claiming like dead tribes and then maybe trying to retribalize or bringing them back. Like, for example, I'm a Guachichil. I've done a lot of genealogy to be able to find this information out, a lot of research. Let's say there's a bunch of people and there's a lot of people that are like, belong to the Chichimecas. In your opinion, could they retribalize? Could they kind of bring that back, if they wanted to with enough work?
Well, retribalizing, what does that mean? That means like going back to your community or establishing a community. Like I said, there is no law and nobody can tell you how you must identify. If you're obviously Native American, and people, we do encourage our people, seek out your roots, seek out your people or your communities if you can, or learn about them as much as you can. And if they're still around, the Huachichil people are still alive, but they're not calling themselves Huachichil anymore. There are still some of the so-called Chichimeca people who still recognize their respective nations. But, colonization left no stone unturned. If you think about it, everybody was touched in one way or another, So I don't see why you cannot dig and research, investigate, and resurrect something. Who says that you can't do that? Who says that you can't? The people among us will. You can't do that. You can't claim that. You're not this, you're not that, but they don't know. They don't know. You're knowing, You're the one doing the work. As a matter of fact, the 200 different bands of the Coahuilteca people no longer exist, but there's a few people throughout Texas who know that they come from a specific band. They're resurrecting songs or writing new songs. They're deciphering the paintings on cliff walls or canyon walls and rocks and starting to plot the astronomy and the geography. Is that against some kind of law out there that, says that we can't do that? No, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, if you're going to be fake and claim some tribe that no longer exists completely, or the language only resides in a book, where some anthropologists made a dictionary before they were completely wiped out or went extinct or assimilated into extinction, and you claim that if you claim that and just, there's frauds out there. But if you're doing the honest work and the research, I don't see why not, and I think people do that all the time. There's people out there who ran off into the assimilated world and they want to come back. So a lot of the work a lot of us are doing, investigating and realizing, we try to point the people back and put them on the path. Okay, where do your parents come from? We created this small database for people who come from Mexico to research with links. Use these tools, see if you could trace your lineage. And we have maps available here on the links too. Make the correlations and find out,
Yeah. Adding on to that, I guess my final question was, with northern tribes, in Canada and the United States in particular, I would say it's extremely important, at least for this movement, as far as, us wanting to identify as Native, having their support is vital. What have you received as far as any feedback from people from tribes? I mean, and if we can even, claim that, we're Indigenous without having our culture. For example, me, who was adopted, I don't know much of my culture. And there's more other people like me as well.
Okay, hold on a second. You can hold that question. I got to plug in really quick.
Sure.
Because my phone's about to die and I can't hear your voice anymore. 1 second, okay?
Not a problem.
All right. Not a problem. I also wanted to, while he does that, I'm going to read two quotes that I had for past historical figures in the United States that, it's funny they acknowledged that we were natives around 150 years ago or before, or older than that, right? So this comes from Thomas Jefferson himself in the letter to Alexander von Humboldt in 1811. He says, all former Spanish colonies are now in insurrection. What kind of government will they establish? Have they mind enough to place their domesticated Indians on a footing with the whites? That's one right there from Thomas Jefferson saying that we're people in Mexico and other places are natives. And the second one is to incorporate Mexico would be the very first instance of the kind of incorporating an Indian race. For more than half of the Mexicans are Indians, and the other is composed chiefly of mixed tribes. I protest against such a union as that. Ours, sir, is the government of a white race. And that was from Senator John C. Calhoun in 1848, following the defeat of Mexico in the Mexican-American War. So I just wanted to bring these two quotes up from historical figures. We got you back, Alex?
He's good.
Alex, you there? Oh, got you. He's letting in. All right.
Those are some really powerful quotes.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right, we got you back.
Yes, I had to jump in my car. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. All right. Marcus, you could probably give the question again.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Alex, our final question was just like, with natives such as myself who don't really have a connection to culture, do you think that, and that's for a lot of people, in South America, Central America, can claim indigenous culture even though we don't have much knowledge of our background? And I wasn't sure what your thoughts were of like what natives of like Canada and the US like thought of this, or even thought of this movement, if they would. I would like to think they'd approve of it, identifying as natives.
There's a few that don't, but from what we gathered interacting with Northern natives, they do support it, and they do know that we are the same people. A large majority of them do, and they are for that. You have a small amount who play the government's rules and say, no, you're not Native American unless you're speaking the language, living the customs, a rich city. Even in Mexico, there's a lot of there's a small contingent of Mexican-born natives that came and studied here, and they're saying the same thing. They claim that we're stealing or speaking over indigenous sovereignty, and when we're not, and the thing is that we need each other, and we are a huge majority here in the United States. We can help them just the same as, them recognizing us. We're not asking for any government benefits. We're not asking to be included as part of their tribes. We know who we are. We're finding out what nation we belong to, whether they're supposedly extinct or dead. We have to resurrect it. And for example, what if there are no self-identifying Huachichil, and one's the only one, and guess he's gonna find more, dig deeper into it, and I found out what the actual language is, and what he's gonna start speaking it and get other people onto it. It happens. It's happening everywhere, whether we like it or not. We have to realize that nothing is under control, but we do make the right decisions in favor for our people. We try to, so the large majority of Northern natives, they do support it, but there are some who say if you've been assimilated, you're no longer Native American. But our response to that is our blood and our genes are still Native American. We're still Native American racially, Look at all the natives who were assimilated in Indian boarding school here in the United States. Are they still Native even though they were stolen and taken from their families? That's what happened to us in many cases. Our ancestors, they were stolen and taken and forced to live an assimilated life. We're still Native American, And a lot of Northern Natives even invite us to participate in their ceremony. They recognize the link between the eagle and the condor. They know about that. As a matter of fact, I think there was what nation it was from Louisiana, Chief Rufus Davis. He said it was his mission before he died. He wanted to see all of our people from Canada to South America united like they used to be before the invasion, you know, as one people who knew each other and recognized each other.
And I know that, you know, with more people waking up to their identity and indigenous roots, that it can happen. It'll be really interesting, I think, like when, you know, people in Central America and South America in particular realize this, just how powerful this movement can get and pick up more steam. And I'm looking forward to the future. So.
For sure. Well, I mean, we're doing this podcast just because we want to convince more people, wake more people up, and this is going to be far from the only conversation. And you know, we'd like to have you back on here as well. You know, in the future, this is not the only time we want to have you here because you have a lot of wisdom and a lot of good insight that we think everybody should hear.
Oh, thank you. We appreciate it. And, you know, this wisdom is not mine originally. It's like I learned this from so many people, interacting with people like you that make us want to do more research and provide more facts and more information, you know. And I just want to tell, you know, that we don't patent. We're not trying to patent or claim ownership of this moment because it was already happening from day one after the invasion. From day one, when our people ran from the fury and the care of the Europeans, or tried to forget, or were thrown in the Indian boarding schools or the residential schools, or thrown on the encomiendas and enslaved, they had to forget who they were for a while, you know. And it was only a matter of time before our memory is going to come back, you know. The invasion's like a very serious blow to the head. You're knocked out unconscious. You're knocked out. You're going to wake up and you're going to start shaking your head and looking around, and you're going to wake up. As you regain consciousness, you're going to begin to remember who you are. You're like, where am I? What am I doing here? Who am I? That's what we're going through right now. That's what the invasion was. It was a near lethal blow to the head. We're still here. We're not extinct. And that's why it's important to survive. I think this is one of the most important ways that we can maintain the survival of our people, is to reclaim our racial identity as Native Americans. Eventually, not many people, but a lot, you know, will start to dig and research and find our roots. Like, you know, it's going to lead to that eventually. The fact that we're seeing so many people claiming or reclaiming their true identity as Native American or Indigenous says a lot. You know, it's already been happening. It's happened, you know, before we started this, but we're just adding more fuel to the fire. You know, we're just trying to speed up the process and get more people. Like, tell your loved ones, all your friends, your relatives, and your children, let them know who they really are. You know, we can't afford to have another generation of our youth claiming that there's some foreign identity, Hispanic or Latino. Hispanic means from Spain. Latino means from the Roman Empire or ancient Rome, the Italian people. We have nothing to do with that. We are not racially European. Whether we're mixed, half or full or partial blooded, we just tell people, like, be whole, be a whole human being. Don't be a percentage. Who are your ancestors, and who are the ancestors you want to follow? If you think you're so mixed, whether you're mixed or not, or, you know, to whatever degree, you know, who's calling you? Which ancestors are calling you, and where is your heart leading you? You're not a percentage. Be whole. You know, be a whole human being. If you want to embrace who you are as a Native American, be Native American. You know, and like we said, yes, there is a line that can be drawn, and the majority of people say, like, hey, they'll call the shots. You know, just by simple observation, you know.
Yeah.
But there are cases where there's more than what meets the eye, you know. So we just got to keep an open mind, you know.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I know with genetics, it's sometimes really weird because I've seen natives with lighter skin than me that are actually more native in terms of percentage, like when they do these tests, which and you can tell by their facial features. They just have a lighter skin tone because it's not always about the skin tone. That's something else. I think some of us are like misled to believe. Like I think skin tone, having dark skin tone is a great indication, but I don't think it's everything either. You know.
Right. And I'm sure that there were light-skinned natives among our ancestors back in the day, you know. I'm sure that, you know, there were anomalies that popped up, just like there's, albino people who pop up in other cultures, you know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, we can't, you know, there's a lot of gray area, you know, but for the most part, we have to just use common sense, you know, and more than anything, convince ourselves that we are native, that we are in fact Native American, you know.
Right,
and,
for sure. One other thing I wanted to kind of mention too is there's some people that think that like you can't claim indigenous without the culture, and they think that everyone needs to get into the culture first, and then you can claim native, which I think is misguided because that's like putting the cart before the horse. You know what I mean? If they don't even know that they're native, how are they gonna get into the culture? How are they gonna do all that? Or what if their culture doesn't exist anymore? Are you gonna say that they can never be native because the culture was wiped out by Europeans? You know? So I think definitely this way of like identify racially as native, and then from there you can start digging more into it is a good way instead of trying to put like again like the cart before the horse.
Yeah, I agree. You have to start somewhere. I mean, what business are people going to think they have in any native ceremonies if they don't know that they're native? You know, it's like somebody identifies as I'm Mexican, you know, or I'm Latino, and this is the way Latinos are, and this and that. I'm not Native American. Why am I going to go jump around and, you know, wear a front cloth piece and cover up my privates and put feathers in my hair? That's crazy. You know, you got to get them started somewhere. So with the most basic information that everybody, you know, for the most part knows are the racial categories. Are you black? No. Are you native? I mean, are you Asian? No. Are you white? No. So then what's left? Are you Native American? Or say that, you know, there's only 4 racial categories in the world. There's black, there's white, there's Asian, and Native American. What's your race? And see what they answer. And people are going to be like, I don't know. You know, we have a video on Identify Native in our video section. It's one of the first videos we posted. Some guy did that in 2010 out in Washington or North Carolina, I think, or Virginia. And he's Mexican. And these obviously native-looking brown people, I don't know, I guess white. Or when they said Hispanic or Latino or Hispanic, he said, no, that's a culture, you know. That's an acquired culture, una herencia cultural, you know. And they said, well, then I don't know, or I must be white then. And then he asked black people, what do you think? Who do you think? What race do you think these people are? And she broke it down. What are the 4 races? And these black people, these black men, were like, they look like Indians, man, Native American, we're the ones that just don't want to get it, or we can't, and that's telling of the social, the mental and spiritual condition that we're in. You know, we just need to quit shooting each other in the foot, you know, and stabbing each other in the back. And we got to stop. We got to love ourselves too.
Within time, I believe we'll get there.
Embrace each other quickly. Yes, definitely. You know, and this is once you know, and this is once the ball gets rolling, you know, once people realize that they're Native American, you know, the process goes into play where it's gonna come down to like, well, you know what, my land was taken. I want my land back. And that's where we can all unify and meet at the center with all our other Native nations, whether we're federally recognized or not, you know. And that's another trap in itself. We don't need federal recognition, you know, and we're not seeking that either. What for? We just need to recognize one another, each other. And as we say, your family is your tribe, your immediate family, your extended family. That's your tribe, you know, because we all lived in extended family living situations. You know, so your extended family is your tribe, and then various extended families they become communities, and once you have several communities, you have a nation. You know, so it's there. It's just a matter of remembering who we are. You know,
right.
that's all you got.
And then these like, as far as like reclaiming lands, you know, all these people, like you know, a lot of us, we're from Mexico, we're from these Central or South American countries. Like, if we can wake up, we can definitely reclaim those countries as an authentic version of a true version of what we really are, and bring that back to life. Because the way things are right now with their colorist societies and these discrimination that you face just because you're darker skin, and people think that they're better because they're slightly more white in Mexico or slightly more white in Peru, that somehow they're superior. That needs to be done away with. And if we can get people to wake up, we can finally reclaim our home countries and bring them back to what they truly are meant to be.
Yeah, I agree, because that's another because the nationalities. You know, we are not Mexican, we are not United States, we are not Canadian, Bolivian, Peruvian, Nicaragua. We're Native American. You know, all these borders and countries, you know, were created by Europeans. Basically, it's when they were fighting each other for pieces of our great continent. You know, and they staked their claims, and then they created countries. And once we identify as a nationality, you know, we're forgetting who we really are. We're not nationalities either. That's another obstacle we need to hurdle.
Yeah.
Certainly. Anything to add, Marcus?
Oh no, I was just going to add on.
Wrap up.
Yeah, you know, going through South America, and I brought this up again. Like, you have Colombia, you know, created by Spain. Bolivia, named after the Simon Bolivar, I think, and then Venezuela, you know, another European created name, and you know, borders separate a lot of, you know, native tribes and separated native people, and you have this mentality of I'm better than you. In reality, in South America, the natives are all, again, they're all the same. It's I call it, you know, the great lie, deception. That I think one thing that I will add is that, you know, I've been reading this book about conquistadors, and to understand like just what took place in Mexico and the Aztec Empire, and I will say they were very good at dividing us natives up and, you know, hating each other. And I still, you know, you see that today with the caste system that we still haven't done away with yet, the colonial caste system in South America, and that's still in place. And I think it's funny because I think that in most of South America, we believe that colonialism was not good for us. It was quite destructive, especially for natives. And yet we still use the mestizo term, which was created by the Spanish, still used in the government. I'm like, I'm sorry, I thought we didn't like colonialism. Why are we still using this word? And
Right.
the push that in the media, white skin is better. I think I brought that up also in the last podcast in South America. And it's sad because it makes people that are darker skinned almost feel inferior. And we're in a native freaking country. That sort of colonialism is still taking place. And like, holy crap, like something has to be done, you know? And I think the more people that wake up to this deception, the more life will be able to change for the better for, you know, native people, especially ones that are you know, living in poverty, living in situations that are not so good for them. And that's the reason why I push this movement, is because I want to help, our brothers and sisters that are living in this, how do I even describe it? Just this terrible lifestyle under, colonial government administrators that don't care about us, especially the ones that aren't doing so good right now. And again, as I said, within time, things will change, as long as people continue to recognize and realize that they are Native, the majority of the populace, and it'll be really good in the United States as well when people realize this. So, yeah, thank you. I was going to say, Alex, for coming on. Unless you had anything else you wanted to say.
I guess probably people who are new to this, and if this makes sense to you, that's because it's true, and that means that you're Native American for the most part, the majority of the viewers. Don't be afraid, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. There is no law, and there is no one who can tell you how to identify. If you're brown, you're Native American from here. If you're not black, if you're not white, if you're not Asian, you're Native American. Remember who you are. Embrace yourself. Look at yourself in the mirror carefully. Look at your mother and father. Look at your brothers and sisters, your grandparents. See who you come from, and realize that you don't come from anywhere else. That you come from here. And the whole mixed blood myth is a myth. The mestizo myth is a myth. It's a weapon of European colonization to make you forget who you are and make you think that you don't belong here. Whether you're mixed or not, you're not a percentage, be a whole human being. And it's the awakening is happening as we speak, even more and more, and we're just trying to give it a push, and we might not see it in our lifetime, but tell your loved ones, tell your children that they're Native American, and eventually they will live free on their homeland. And then I want to thank you guys.
Yeah. No, thank you, Alex. Really appreciate your time on here. We look forward to talking with you again. To our viewers out there, again, thank you again for watching. And if you like the video, go ahead and subscribe for another one that we'll be making in the future. Hope you all have a good night. And this will be Marcus, Juan, and Alex signing off.
Goodbye, guys.
Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Marcus.